Okay, Vanessa, this is Act 2, Part 2 analysis notes for you. So, in terms of this part of the play, we've got Big Daddy and Brick kind of finally left alone to have their kind of discussion and chat about the relationship now that everyone has left and Big Daddy's kind of shooed them all away. So, Big Daddy calls for Brick and Maggie follows her husband back in. Um, and when she goes to leave, she kisses Brick, and Big Daddy notices Brick's reaction in terms of Brick's disgust at Maggie wiping his lips, almost trying to get rid of the scent of her, every single part of her away. And Big Daddy notices this and starts to comment a little bit about their relationship, and that then kind of starts to build up this confrontation between the two of them, because it's all about Brick and Big Daddy in Act 2 and this building up of tension, and the kind of revelation that we see at the end of Act 2 from Brick to Big Daddy. So this moment there's tension, but it's almost like a kind of man-to-man chat, father and son, kind of talking about the ways of the world, and Big Daddy's trying to give Brick some of his well-earned wisdom, and Brick again isn't that bothered, isn't that fussed. Big Daddy also kind of talks about his wealth within this bit, and the consciousness of morality and what he manages to own and what he's managed to accumulate, but that doesn't save anyone from death. That he kind of has this epiphany or this realization within this part of the act that despite all his money, all his worldly goods, people will still die, and it doesn't mean he can take any of it with him. And it's almost like he's kind of just realised this because he's had his brush with death, supposedly, as he thinks he's managed to escape on the other side. But obviously, Brick knows different than that. He does kind of express this relief about being reprieved, but we also have this kind of really, I suppose, awkward and inappropriate conversation where Big Daddy talks about his sexual drive and the regrets he has about marrying Big Mama, and the fact that he finds her almost disgusting and repulsive now, and he wants other women, and he's seeing this new lease of life as a way to live the life he's always wanted, and live the life that he's always wanted to have. Big Mama still is within this scene a little bit, and she interrupts to answer the phone conversation. But again, Big Daddy uses that cruelty that we've seen earlier on, and a kind of attacks her and gets rid of her. So within this bit, we're getting a lot of tension between the two of them, and we also start to see Brick, I don't know, maybe a more violent side of him, or we're starting to see what's kind of going on underneath everything that's happening, and we're starting to see Brick move away from that kind of silent and aloof person, and we're starting to see his anger start to build up within this section, which again, as I said, is building us up to the end of this act in itself. Big Daddy kind of crudely talks about arranging a more satisfying sex life here, and wants something that he has never had before, because he is so disgusted by Big Mama, and because he's had this realization that he's not supposedly going to die, he wants to make the most of it now. The argument again mirrors the discussion that that Brick and Maggie had at the start, with both of them, Maggie and Big Daddy, feeling this need to discuss things with Brick and to get things off their chest and to get something back from him. But Brick is not interested. He doesn't want to have that. And I think Big Daddy feels this need to kind of square up to Brick or be honest with him, is because he feels that he needs to get something from his son, that Brick has always kind of kept this hidden, and this is Big Daddy's kind of realisation that he's going to live, supposedly, and he wants to make sure he's sharing this time and this his wisdom with his son. However, Big Daddy is a bit more effective than Maggie. He manages to get under Brick's skin. He manages to get Brick to react, but not for Big Daddy's benefit. We've also got a little bit more of Big Daddy's sexuality come through, and this idea of have Brick and Big Daddy ever really been honest with each other. We start to see that a little bit here when he talks about Maggie's behaviour, his behaviour to Maggie, and the fact that he talks about the women and their shape. So May and her obvious fertility is picked up by Big Daddy, but he sees her almost as like a baby machine, that she's there to provide a function of providing children for the family, and that's it. She has nothing else. And Big Daddy basically admits that Brick is his favourite son, and that Gooper is never really going to have a chance of carrying on this legacy because he doesn't take Gooper seriously. Brick is like his golden boy. May is also caught eavesdropping within this scene as well. Again, Williams is using interruptions and disruptions between the conversation between Brick and Big Daddy, because he's using that kind of almost farcical element of the play to identify and emphasise that nothing is ever private in this house. And there's no way a secret is going to be kept because they're constantly interrupted. And with the eavesdropping May, we know why she's doing it. She wants to hear what's going on and to find out any information about the legacy of Big Daddy, the money, the estate, and she was caught right out. Big Daddy also kind of has a air of disappointment within this act. There's a kind of maudlin tone to his nostalgia when he's looking back on his life and what he's experienced. He almost seems a little bit wistful or regretful. So he is happy he's had this reprieve from death, but at the same time, he's starting to realise that everything he's ever worked for and everything he's ever had has not really been worth it, because he can't do anything with it once he's gone. And even as he starts to talk to Brick about his drinking problem, when he starts to realise that Brick does have an issue, he can't help himself but to go on into detail about how successful he was, and all the things that he's bought. And that it's not accidental that he keeps being distracted by his own story, by his own self, and that tells you a lot about Big Daddy's characterisation. He talks about a man can't buy his life when his life is finished, and that's the kind of epiphany that Big Daddy has found within this cancer scare. And this is where his drive and sexual desire comes from, because he's wanting to embrace as much of life as he can. And here we have a direct contrast with Brick, who is almost apathetic towards Maggie, doesn't seem to have any kind of sexuality. There is nothing to him now. He's cold, he's aloof, he's almost just a drunken man who is trying to self-medicate and numb himself to everything that's around him. We also have Big Daddy has these speeches on about the human animal, and the crazy hope and the life everlasting, that, you know, that's man's true wish, to pass a legacy on, to have their name still carry on even when they're dead. But at the same time, Brick is compromised because he realises and he knows that Big Daddy is dying and does have cancer, and there's nothing that Brick can do about it. We also have Brick maybe start to unfreeze a little bit. He says things like communication is awful hard between people. And Brick is starting to perhaps admit to Big Daddy that they've never been able to be honest or never truly talked, because that's not what men do. That's not part of their psyche. That's not part of who they are as, you know, manly men. And so Brick is perhaps trying to say to him that, well, why are you telling me all of this? Because we've never had this conversation before. We also then have things become a little bit more kind of chaotic, because we've got these constant interruptions with Gooper's children, and we've also got the phone call from the maid and aunt, and Big Mama kind of tries to interrupt again, and we've got this kind of terrible pun where she talks about, I think in this section, that Big Daddy's dying to see you, and we, using our dramatic irony, know that that is actually true, because Big Daddy is dying. And we're starting to build up again to what's going to happen at the end of this act. So Act 2, Part 3 has a lot going on, because this is just kind of setting the scene for us and starting to raise the tension a little before we move into the revelation and what happens later on. So we start to see a continuation of Big Daddy's kind of dismissive and crude nature the way he talks about the women in his life, the way he talks about Maggie, the way he talks about May. And we've also got this kind of, I don't know, I said maudlin earlier, but self-pitying and quite narcissistic point of view, where he keeps coming back to him, and he keeps trying to express that he has not had the life that he's always wanted. He never got to have all the women, and that's where his kind of sexual potency lies now, because he's going to make the most of it. He feels that people need to fool themselves into believing that they'll live forever, and he's been duped by the same thing. He talks about saying the human animal is a beast that dies, and if he's got money, he buys and buys and buys. And I think the reason he buys everything he can buy is, in the back of his mind, he has a crazy hope that one of his purchases will be life everlasting. So that's basically what's behind everything in this conversation, is that life is going to be everlasting for Big Daddy, but at this moment it's not going to be possible, because as we know, and as Brick knows, Big Daddy is going to die, and much sooner than he realises. He now, with his kind of new lease of life, is going to abandon his scruples. He talks about what he's going to do now that he's got this new opportunity. Later on in this part of the act, he says, "I let many chances slip by because of scruples about it. Scruples, convention, all that stuff is bull, bull, bull. It took the shadow of death to make me see it. Now that shadow is lifted, I'm going to cut loose and have, what as they call it, have me a ball." And at that moment, he's talking about finding other women, having sex with them, cheating on his wife, and making it clear that Big Mama is kind of cut from him just now. He has no connection to her anymore, because he's not tied to her, because he thought he was dying previously. That's really emphasised at the end of this part, because he then painfully excludes her from the room, and it rejects her even more when she comes in, or tries to come in, to tell him about the phone call. And then this scene ends with the childlike voice fades with a sob, and our heavy footsteps retreat down the hall. Brick has risen once more on his crutch and starts for the gallery again. So we start to see here that Big Mama is being cast aside. She's devastated, but Big Daddy doesn't care. And Brick at this moment is in a conversation with his dad, but isn't fully involved. But that begins to change in the part 3, the end of Act 2, which is quite a lot going on. And that's when we end with the kind of revelation. So I'll give you the video for Act 2, Part 3 later on this week, and we'll move on to Act 3.